the idea that having a child will utterly destroy your life, that has seeped young people's minds, especially, in such a deep way. And I think that has been pushed for so many decades and from so many angles that the average young man, the average young woman is like terrified of that concept.
Zuby, thanks for coming out.
Happy to be here, Lila.
It's great to see you.
No doubt.
So you came from where?
I flew in yesterday from Las Vegas.
Okay.
But I was in Miami the day before that. A week before that, I was in the UK. Before that, I was in Italy, Nigeria,
Nice.
Qatar, UAE. I've been all over the place this
Okay,
year.
so you just travel.
I travel a lot, yeah.
Okay.
Haven't been all the way.
But California is probably your favorite place of all those places.
You know, California is a beautiful place where many parts of it have been ruined by bad policy, which
Yes.
feels like a massive shame.
It is true.
It's a beautiful part of the world. It's got some of the best climate in the entire world. There's a lot of wonderful people here still, beautiful scenery, all that. But in some of the major cities, of course, as everybody knows, you know, they're just letting them turn into war zones and zombie lands, which is a massive shame.
We're in one of those last few enclaves of California that hasn't been completely destroyed by the policies of the state.
Yeah.
Because you find those pockets in Southern California.
Yeah, I know they're there. It's probably the majority of the state is probably fine, but the urban centers, Los Angeles, San Francisco, some of the other larger cities, at least in significant parts of them. I first came to California actually in 2019, and I flew into LA. It was actually the first time I did the Joe Rogan podcast.
Nice.
I also did the Ben Shapiro
Nice.
Sunday special
Yep.
when they were still out there. I did Dave Rubin's show. And then after that, I went up to San Francisco, and it was really eye-opening because you hear stuff online and through the media and everything, but until you travel to a place and you spend time there and walk around and meet people and sort of imbue yourself in the culture to some degree and in the city, you don't really know what places are like.
Yeah,
So
it's true.
I've been blessed to be able to travel my entire life and grow up across a range of different countries and cultures, be exposed to a lot of different types of places, types of people, and it gives me a unique perspective on a lot of things, which I think a lot of people appreciate.
Yes, of course. So what was it like, well, back to when you came here the first time, what was it like doing Joe Rogan's podcast? And this was before he fled Los Angeles, right?
Yes, yeah, this is in 2019.
Ditched, yeah, before the pandemic.
Yeah, so many people, all those people have left now. So Joe Rogan's
Crazy.
left, the Daily Wire moved their
Yes.
whole operation to Nashville. Dave Rubin is now in Miami.
Yep.
And so many people I know who used to be in California.
Hey,
have
we're
actually
still
left
here
at this point. So
for now.
yeah, you're still here holding it down. Figure You is still here.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a few.
What was it like during Rogan's podcast? Was that the first time?
Yeah, first time. Second time was in 2021. It was awesome. It was awesome. And it was good to come out to LA for the first time. It was really my first trip to the USA for work purposes. I came here multiple times in my childhood, and then I came once in my early 20s. But I ended up staying in the country for 3 months. So I was in California first, then I went to Texas for the first time. I went out to Washington, D.C., New York, Tennessee, a lot of different places, got the opportunity to go on a lot of different shows and podcasts. I was on Tucker Carlson for the first time because this is in the wake of me identifying as a woman and breaking the British women's deadlift record back in 2019, which led to this sort of massive media interest. And that's the sort of
A little
energy
activisty.
I just thought it was funny.
Yeah.
I just thought it was funny.
Are you still identifying as a woman now, or?
Right now, in this moment,
Okay.
I'm Zuby
Okay.
the man. But
Okay.
depending on what is most convenient for me, I sometimes go back and forth.
Okay, got it. Okay,
Gender
so
fluid.
for people, for gender fluid, for people listening who aren't very familiar with Zuby, tell me a little bit about your background
Absolutely. So,
and how you ended up identifying as a woman in a deadlifting competition for not a joke, but kind of a joke, and then from there on, what happens next?
No problem. So let's take it way back. So I was born in England, Luton to be precise. A lot of great people were born in the city of Luton, but none of us ever returned. So I was born in England. My family is originally from Nigeria, Igbo specifically. So both my parents are Nigerian. Last of 5 kids. When I was a baby, my family moved to Saudi Arabia. My dad's a doctor, and we lived out there for a total of 20 years.
Wow.
So all my earliest memories are in Saudi Arabia. I went to preschool there. I went to kindergarten to 5th grade in Saudi Arabia. Then when I was 11 years old, I went to boarding school. So actually, it's worth mentioning as well that when I was in school in Saudi, I was basically in the American school system. So that's why I even say kindergarten to 5th grade, which doesn't mean anything to British people. But I went to boarding school very early when I was 11 years old. So from the age of 11, I was traveling back and forth. I went to school in the UK. So I was back and forth between the UK and Saudi Arabia.
So your family was still in Saudi Arabia,
Exactly.
And then you would just go for the school semester, basically?
Yep. So 3 times a year, back and forth between those countries. I did 7 years of school in the UK, did really well in school, was a good student. I got into Oxford University. I studied there for 3 years, got my degree in computer science, graduated when I was 20. I wrote and released my first album when I was in my 2nd year of university. What do Americans call that, sophomore? That's when I put out my first album and had the spark with my music and everything.
What kind of music?
I'm a rapper. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm a rapper. I've put out 6 albums and 3 EPs now. My last album came out in 2021, and fingers crossed I'll have another one next year.
By the way, what part of rap do you like the most? Is it the lyricism? Is it or do you like all of it?
The wordplay and storytelling is the thing that attracts me most to hip-hop.
I would think it seems like you're very intellectual rapper, but many of them are. I mean,
hip-hop gets a bad rap because, like many things, it is, how would I put this? I think there are many cases in society where any group or anything is the sort of mainstream opinion of it is determined by the worst examples of it.
Yeah.
And in hip-hop in particular, that's not surprising because the mainstream hip-hop, the stuff you might hear on the radio or in a nightclub or whatever, the stuff that gets pushed out there, and honestly the stuff which a lot of people like and which sells the most records, is pretty degenerate. It's not unique to hip-hop. The same thing can happen in rock music. It can even happen in pop music these days. If you look at pop now, pop music used to be a lot cleaner, whereas now, pop music, R&B, all those sort of things, they've all degenerated over the past couple decades. Like, it used to be weird to hear singers cussing. Like, you'd always hear like heavy metal artists and rappers cussing, but now you listen to just sort of normal mainstream pop music, and they're using the same language now, and their videos are more risque than the rap videos which were coming out in the 90s and early 2000s, which a lot of people had problems with. So you have sort of seen this coarsening of mainstream media and mainstream entertainment over time, which has been an interesting observation, say from the late 80s or 90s up until now, which is kind of
it's like the sexual revolution happened. Huge changes in culture to sort of liberate people sexually is what they claimed, and now there's so much degenerate behavior and activity, and so we're kind of following the music as a reflection, and it also feeds the craziness of the culture.
Absolutely. And it's an interesting one because oftentimes people, especially being a rapper, I've been asked so many times, do I think hip-hop is a net positive or net negative, or why do rappers talk about some of the things that they do, et cetera? I think a much more interesting question is, why do so many people like it, right? To me, the big question isn't, why do fast food companies sell the crappy food they do? Why do junk food companies sell the junk food they do? Why do rappers talk about sex, money, drugs, their cars, their jewelry, whatever? I'm like, well, because there's a giant market for it. So I think actually the interesting question to me is more on the demand side. Because if there's a demand for it, people are going to supply, right? If tons and tons of people want to, I don't think it's, I know why drug dealers sell drugs, but why do so many people want drugs, right? If there wasn't a giant market for all drugs, then there's no money to be made in selling it. So it's not really like, well, why are people selling? So, well, there's a lot of money in selling that thing. So if there's a lot of money, if there's a giant market, there's going to be consumption for it. And it goes across so many things. It's not, why are so many young women making OnlyFans accounts? And so, like, why are there so many millions of men who are demanding it and paying for it? Like, because there's more of them than there are the people, there's more consumers than there are producers by many multiples. But I find that a lot of times people don't really ask those questions. It's always like, why is there the supply? Why is there that stuff going out there? And it's like, well, as long as people demand it, somebody, we can question the ethics and the morality of providing certain things to people, but I think the real answer is, okay, you want to stem the demand, and you want to ask the questions around why so many people want and are consuming these things.
Well, I think about someone like Lauryn Hill, who I'm a big fan of, and her, like a lot of her music and her stuff. I mean, I know that's more like 90s, I guess, at this point, but it's so intelligent and it's so like, there's so much beauty in what she's promoting in her words, because she's telling the stories of, some dark things and some, there's definitely like sexual themes, but they're positioned in a way that are putting it in a certain moral order, that you can listen to it and it actually tells the truth about these things, instead of like just dwelling on evil and glamorizing evil, quite frankly. So I think it's also like, you can create a demand for, or there is a demand for depraved things, but there's also a demand for good things and true things and beautiful things. And I think that's obviously why your work is appealing and your voice is appealing, because you're trying to speak the truth. You're doing it in a beautiful way. And so I think it goes both ways, right? There is a demand for evil stuff. Yeah, always has been, always will be. But I do think there's a demand for the good stuff. It just takes a visionary creative to be willing to do the hard work of creating something truly beautiful, as opposed to just doing the degenerate route.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think the reality is, though, that the demand for, the demand for fast food is higher than what's the biggest and most profitable restaurant in the world?
McDonald's, is it?
Right? Does McDonald's make
the
best
burger?
But
it's cheap. It's cheap, right?
It's not even that cheap these days.
It's
just, but
Whole Foods is expensive.
But that's the thing. So there is certainly a demand for. I mean, I wouldn't even be able to have a career.
Yeah.
Neither of us would. Lots of people would not be able to have a career
without McDonald's.
If there was no demand for things that are more positive and encouraging and wholesome and whatnot. But the truth is that the market is smaller.
Yeah.
And we do live in a largely capitalistic and consumer-based society where stuff is about money and making profit. So if you are a record label and you've got, these 5 rappers or singers who are, they're positive, or they're even making faith-based music, or they're talking about, good, positive, wholesome things, and they can sell 200,000 records, and then you've got this is totally debased, and they're just rapping about, drug dealing and having sex with all the women possible and popping champagne and this and that, but that sells 2 million records. The market forces put the focus and, the radio airplay, the Spotify streaming, the television, the music video budgets, all that stuff, more of it goes towards that. And then you end up in this sort of positive feedback loop, I think, where you can also create demand by people being exposed to things. So more and more young people are exposed to that rather than that, and it creates an even greater demand. And this has been going on for many decades at this point. It's not something new. I think now we have social media and smartphones and whatever, so things spread faster and wider. But
you have to train. It's kind of what you're saying. You can create more of a demand through exposure, but you can train the market to be more attracted to the good if enough effort is put into it. And I mean, I look at like the history of the 20th century and ideologies that got us to where we are today, and technology to some degree. But I mean, the sexual revolution is something we talk a lot about on Exclusives, and there were architects of the sexual revolution, like very smart but very twisted people like Alfred Kinsey and like Freud in many ways, who had this very distinct view of the human person. Like, human beings are endlessly sexual and they just want to have sex with anything and anyone. Children are sexual, and their ideas kind of took hold. They got some powerful funders, like the Rockefeller Institute was a big funder of Kinsey. And so, meaning it wasn't an upswell, it wasn't a groundswell, I should say. It wasn't coming from the people saying we want sexual depravity. It was some like architects, ideologues, and financiers who had these crazy ideas, and they pushed those ideas on the population through an organized campaign. And down the line, now we have degeneracy in a lot of pop culture and media, but it didn't necessarily come because people just were asking for it. There were
forces and ideological people pushing it. Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think what's interesting, though, is throughout history, we always have had these cycles. We've always had these cycles, right? As a religious person, you know that one of the most fundamental understandings of humanity is we are fallen, we are naturally sinful, we're prone to, in the absence of other light and foundations and guiding principles, we are prone to falling back to our basic animalistic natures, right? So even at the time when the Bible or the Torah was, put out there, what was that, 6,000 or so years ago with the Old Testament, then why were even some of those rules and laws and codes put in? It's because the way people were behaving at that time was not in line with what we now consider, say, Christian principles, right? People were just out there and doing whatever. People were very violent. People were very sexually promiscuous. The value of a life was very cheap. People were killing each other over nothing. You're probably dealing with human sacrifices and all sorts of crazy stuff. And then that comes in and there are principles to correct it. But then all throughout the next several thousand years, you have periods of rebellion. A lot of people talk about Rome and, the fall of Rome, the society. It was very ordered and good and whatever. And then over time, it became very degenerated and debased, and people fell back into those base human natures, and everything changed and ultimately it fell. And so I think it's just cyclical. I think we have cycles. And I think right now we're going through a cycle of debasement and degeneracy over the last few decades. You can again see this coarsening of society in many, many ways. I was not alive in the 1950s or 1940s, but say from then, over the next 80 years or so. And I do think, again, there will be, in morally and culturally, it feels like we are on a decline. We're on a technological incline. But I think more, a lot of people are feeling it. It's a lot of the root of a lot of the culture war stuff and the concerns that people are having about society, about their families, about children, all this kind of stuff. But there's bound to be a correction. The pendulum will swing back. And I just think that's how society goes. And I think we just happen to be caught at this time of all these different intersections and all these different clashes and all these changes going on, where we're in a very weird time, which is confusing a lot of young people, I think, where you have some of these sort of modern or even postmodern ideas, and then they're clashing with traditional ideas and traditional ethics and morals and Christian values. In the USA, for example, is the USA a Christian country? Right? That's an interesting question.
Post-Christian.
Yeah, in some ways, yeah. In many ways, absolutely not, right? And these things are clashing, and they're clashing along all these different lines. It's affecting the social sphere, the political sphere, the way men and women relate to each other and form families or don't. Just so the attitude towards so many issues. You have this, I often call it the inversion agenda, where it's like, up is becoming down, down is up. People don't know left from right, man from woman, woman from man. Like, it's just all confused. It's all subjective. People used to talk about the truth. Now it's his truth, her truth, your truth, my truth. Identify as whatever you want, be whatever you want. And it's causing a lot of identity crisis for people. I think a lot of people don't really know who they are, let alone what they stand for, what the principles are, what the principles should be, if principles even exist. It's all just very subjective. And whilst I think that those type of ideas were supposed to liberate people and make people feel free, and hey, you can be whatever you want and you can do whatever you do, but it's gone so overboard that people don't even know the rules of the game anymore. And people are literally having debates about what even is a man, what even is a woman, not what's masculinity, but like, oh, do these things even exist? What even are these categories? Does any of it matter, right? What about just how people feel? So yeah, we're in a weird time.
Yeah, that's a fact. It is a weird time. Yeah. I'm hopeful though, because I agree there seems to be cycles to history, and bad ideas repeat themselves. And you have different bad ideas today, but in the past there have been a view of man and woman that's not correct, or there's different. Even this idea of human rights certainly didn't exist in the Roman Empire, the way that we understand it today, that people are created equal. But the good news, I think, is that we're not fated to anything. Yes, we're fated to individually, we have temptations and we can make mistakes, but at large, we can choose the good, and that can direct the shape of society. So I'm very hopeful, because I don't think, like, the Roman Empire fell, but it kind of fell, degeneracy is part of it, but it also fell because it lost its identity. And Christianity, there's a sociologist named Rodney Stark, who I love. He's written all these books about the rise of Christendom, basically. He's not even a Christian, but he has studied it. And he says there was no dark ages, the way it's misunderstood about Christianity. In fact, it was ongoing revolution out of Greco-Roman society that saw, women and children as valuable, that cared about the poor, Christians starting the hospital system, that cared about educating the masses, Christians starting education systems. And so, yes, the Roman Empire fell, but it was falling into decay as Christianity was rising. And so what's the end story of like these Western ideals that we have that are from Christianity about equality and about truly loving your neighbor as yourself? Like that's a rule given to us by God, right? For those that are listening that are Christian, we believe it's from God. What is the end story of that? Well, it can be a great revival, I think, in how we treat each other in society, but it just depends, what do we do?
Yeah.
Do we take part in that, or do we reject it? And that's the human story.
Yeah.
Do we reject or take part in the good?
Yeah, absolutely. And then on top of all this, you add in technology.
Right.
Right? So just from the technology that we now have, the game has completely changed again. We're at a completely unique period in as a human species that will never go back in the bottle. And I don't think a lot of people really think about that, right? So from now on, billions of people all around the world are interconnected and able to communicate. That has never been possible before, right? It's never been possible before. Even the ability for people to travel in the way that we do now. Like we don't really think about airplanes and traveling, whether it's domestically, internationally, whatever. We've grown up with it. We're used to it. You're like, for the vast majority of human history, I mean, it's fewer than 100 years that you've had commercial air travel in the way that we have it now. So people used to be very region locked. You're in this city or town or village or country, and the chances of you even leaving the country or even having the ability to are almost zero, right? So people were just very region locked. And then even when that changed, we still couldn't sort of communicate en masse. Like we have access to millions of people. We can reach in our pocket and send a message, audio, video, photo, text, whatever, and you can reach millions of people all around the world in real time and then put that thing back in your pocket. They can respond, they can get back to you, positive, negative, whatever. We do it all day, every day. I mean, literally, we would not be able to do what we do without that.
We wouldn't be sitting without having me messaging you on Twitter and being like, "Hey."
Yeah, but even in the 90s, that wasn't possible. And so with that comes so much opportunity, but it also comes so much challenge. And I think also as human beings, we're not really wired for that. Like sometimes it freaks me out how many followers I have and how many people I reach and how many people know me. And it's cool, but I'm also like, this is abnormal. This is weird. I'm not supposed to be connected to millions of people. I'm not supposed to have so many people know who I am. Like my ancestors were probably dealing with a couple hundred people at most for their entire lives. And now I can put out a message and just, it's remarkable. And I think we don't really think about it. And that's never going to change now. That's how it is permanently now. Many children who are born now, they're literally on the internet before they're out of their mother. Right? People are posting up their baby scans and everything like that. So like your child is on Facebook or Instagram or what before their 0th birthday. And so like from now on, and also everything we're doing now will live forever. So you can't go back and you can't even see a photo of your great-great-grandmother or your great-great-grandfather in most cases, right? Let alone a video, let alone hear their voice, everything we are now creating, all the stuff you've put on the internet, your voice, your image, your videos, all that, your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren will be able to just access it and be like, oh, this is my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother.
Unless someone presses the delete button.
Yeah, unless somehow it's all eradicated, which I think is, that would probably mean that some other catastrophic thing has happened.
Yeah.
But I think that's remarkable. And I think we don't often think about just how fundamentally these things have changed and shifted and what's the impact of all that going to be on future generations, let alone whatever new technologies they start coming up with AI and the metaverse and virtual reality and Lord knows whatever else is going to come down the line because it's unpredictable. Even in the 1980s, people wouldn't have predicted the internet in the way it is. If you go back and you watch old sci-fi movies, you'll see that no one has a mobile phone, right? Because they didn't even predict that people would have cell phones, So I think it's exciting in many ways, but I think humanity is just going to be hit with so many challenges, social, cultural, political. I think the actual concept of countries themselves is going to massively change over the next couple centuries. That's a whole other rabbit hole.
We'll save that for the podcast, or the other podcast. Yeah.
So
what globalism's impact is.
Yeah.
So you said something about children, though, like effectively, it's almost like a one giant social experiment on children, the way that we put them on the internet and the way that they're born into a world of technology, endless technology. You've been outspoken on life. You've shared your public pro-life sentiment many times. Why are you pro-life?
Yeah, sure. The first time I did, let me tell you something funny. So the most followers I've ever gained from a tweet is about somewhere between 20 and 30,000.
That's not bad.
Not bad.
Pretty good.
That was from my deadlift one. Most I've lost from a single tweet was about 4,000. And it was the first time I publicly said I was pro-life. I don't even remember exactly what I said, but I think I basically said something about abortion being bad or being murder or something. And like I lost, at this time, if I lost 4,000 followers now, like I probably wouldn't notice. But at the time, I saw the number. I saw the number just dropping in real time. And it's interesting because the reason why that happened is because when I did, I'm just telling a little story here, I will answer your question. But after I did that deadlift thing, I had a lot of feminists start following me.
Who were anti?
Yes, the ones they call TERFs, right?
TERFs,
the trans exclusive type.
J.K.
feminists.
Rowling types.
Yeah. So a lot of them started following me and were like almost championing me, like, oh wow, look, this is a man who's standing up for women, whatever. And then like a week later, they find out I don't support abortion, and I'm dealing with a whole other sort of.
Thanks for being brave and doing that.
It's all good.
I know 4,000 followers for some people. That's like.
It's fine. I like losing followers at this point, but
it's so important.
It was interesting. It was actually very telling to me because I was quite intrigued by that response. I was like, oh wow, not just the level of intolerance, but the fact that is the thing. That's the belief that I have. That's the thing that I say that's causing thousands of people to not even be able to follow me or to think I'm a bad person or this or that. I'm like, wow, this comes back to that inversion. I mean, it's quite remarkable to me that in the West, being pro-life and being publicly or vocally pro-life is the thing that makes you, quote unquote, a bad guy. Like, you can't really have a greater inversion than that.
We're working on changing that.
Yeah.
Because it's so absolutely insane.
It's
Children
insane,
are
right?
the most beautiful blessing and gift, and pregnancy is a blessing and gift, and the hatred for the unborn child, to the point that 2,500 children are killed every single day in America by abortion.
Yeah, and it's, so to answer your question of why am I pro-life, the reason I'm pro-life is because to be, quote unquote, pro-choice, pro-abortion rights is probably the most accurate way of saying it. It means you either have to deny the humanity of the child in the womb and say this is not really a human, or this is not alive, or this is not a person, or you hear people say this is a parasite, it's just a clump of cells, whatever it is. That is biologically illiterate. That's not an honest position rationally nor scientifically, especially in the age of people having ultrasounds and 4D scans and all this kind of stuff, right? We all know this is a human being in an early stage of life. Anyone who's honest knows. Even people who call themselves, pro-choice or who support abortion, whatever, they know that when they or their female friend is pregnant, no one's going to a fetus shower. No one asks a woman how her clump of cells is doing if they see that she's pregnant. No one says, oh, how's your little parasite in there? No one even speaks in that language unless the child is not wanted, right? Everyone knows it's a baby unless they don't want it. And that's logically, rationally, biologically, it's absurd. As someone who does their best to be intellectually honest, I can't suddenly flip-flop between back and forth of, oh, it's a baby, it's not a baby. Like, it's a baby. We know it's a baby. And then, so that's the first part. And then the second part is, if you're intellectually honest and you accept this is a human being, this is a living human being who's at an early stage of life and will grow, you then have to say that it is sometimes okay to intentionally and directly take an innocent human life, primarily for selfish reasons in the vast majority of cases. And that morally does not sit right with me. I don't think it's right to intentionally take an innocent human life. So for that reason, I'm pro-life. That's it. It's actually a fairly simple one. It's like, this is a human life. This is a human being. This is an innocent child. And it is wrong to intentionally and directly take an innocent human life. I believe that at all life stages. It's a very consistent view. I don't need to like do any mental judo or, you know, be hypocritical or flip-flop on these things or whatever. And so I naturally became pro-life. I think I always, on a moral and an ethical level, I always probably have been, but I didn't expressly become pro-life until my late 20s, simply because I never thought about it. I just didn't think about the issue, right? I never liked the idea of abortion. I was always like, yeah, that's killing a baby. Actually, on my very first single, I literally have a lyric where I say, I'm talking about my rapping skills, and I literally say, I'm deadly like abortion is. Nice. And that song's from 2006. So it's always been in me like, okay, yeah, this is kind of killing. But I literally didn't think about it. I was never put in a position where I even had to think about it.
What made you start thinking about it at late 20s?
Do you know what it was? I think something had happened. It was something that was going. I was living in the UK at the time, and I think one of the states in the US had passed some bill around it. I think it was Georgia had passed some bill, and there was a massive
to liberalize it or to criminalize it, or to make it legal?
I think to restrict it.
To restrict
it, I think to restrict it to once there's a heartbeat.
Probably Georgia, yeah.
Maybe Georgia, this is about 6 years ago or something. And this led to a massive public conversation about it. And people even in the UK were talking about it. Because again, we're so interconnected now that if something happens in the US, immediately people in Canada, UK, Australia, whatever, are talking about it. So I was just seeing all these conversations going on. And I was like, sometimes I have an afternoon where I will just research something, right? There's something I am hearing about, and I'll just be like, all right, let me find out more about this issue. So I literally spent an afternoon of just learning more about this subject, listening to arguments on both sides of it, listening to debates. Haunts me to this day, but I actually watched a D&E, dilation and evacuation abortion, like a real one.
How did you find that video?
On the internet.
Was it a live video or an animation?
No, it was live. It was a real one. And I saw, okay.
Was it Center for Bioethical Reform?
Boy. It was actually from a documentary, I believe. What was it called? It was whoever made The Silent Scream. I watched that one. Which I think was a first trimester one. And then they did a follow-up. I think it was called, not Beyond the Edge of Reason, but something, whatever the sequel to that was.
I think there's a group called the Center for Bioethical Reform. They're actually California-based here too, in Southern California. And they've actually gotten the live footage of abortions from abortionists.
Okay.
Because otherwise we wouldn't even have that content. I mean, no one would know that this is what happens, because the abortionist is certainly not going to like publicize it on his YouTube channel.
No.
So it's pro-life activists that got it ultimately from an abortion clinic, and it's probably the footage you saw was because it was like you see the birth canal,
you see
and
the whole, yeah.
I mean, it's absolutely you see the body parts of the child.
You see the whole thing, yeah. So I'm glad I watched it. I'm also like I'm not even someone who's that squeamish at all. Right. And I was like, holy crap, like this is what they're doing. And, you know, people don't even know that. Right. And then, you know, I'd seen images before of, you know, a fetus post-abortion at different stages and whatever. Like I've seen the imagery. Like I don't shy away from stuff. If I want to really learn what something is, I'm not cool with just, you know, let's just have euphemisms and fuzzy language. And I'm like, I want to see like what we're actually dealing with here, right? You all are saying, you know, clump of cells, not a human, whatever. And I'm like, oh, this is a literal baby, right? This is a baby you've just butchered and is all bloody and whatever on the table, chopped to pieces. Like, this is what you're supporting, right? Especially the people who are there saying like, oh, anytime, you know, second trimester, third trimester, whatever. I'm like, this is the reality of it. Let's get away from the fuzzy language and hiding around. This is what it is. So that just, from the intellectual perspective, I would have been was already pro-life. And then that just made it even more firm and clear, so that in my head, when these conversations are even happening, I know what we're talking about. I also looked at, the gestational ages. Like, let me go back to let's go back to biology and literally see, when we're talking 2 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 20 weeks, what are we really talking about? So for example, in the UK, you can abort a child for any reason up until 24 weeks, right? Any reason. If they have any type of impediment or potential disability, this could be something as light as a cleft palate or cleft lip, then there's no limit, right? Canada has no limit all the way through. There's various places with, so different countries have set lines in different places, from outright criminalization to legal up through, week 39 or 40. So I wanted to just learn as much as possible. And again, listen to and have conversations with people, listen to different sides. I think it's probably when I first discovered some of you. I think the first time I ever heard you was on Dave Rubin, perhaps in 2019 or so. So, I was listening to Ben Shapiro's arguments. I was listening to, pro-choice arguments and listening to what people were saying. And it came back down to those two things I first mentioned. Either they deny that it's a human being and that it's alive, right? Which is just not honest. Or they're saying, and I think so many people do that because the second point is really, from a moral and ethical perspective, to say that it's okay to take an innocent human life, to say, okay, yes, this is a baby, but you should still be able to kill him or kill her. That doesn't sound nice, right? That doesn't sound like, even in someone's own heart, who considers themselves like a good person and a moral person and whatever, like there are people who, will just be fully honest with it all and say that, but it does sound horrific and demonic. So I think a lot of people shy away from that, and they're just like, nope, it's not a baby, because it's easier.
Right. And then the second thing is, you were saying there's two things of the humanity of the child, and then the second thing is that it's always wrong to kill, right? Which is what you're saying
It's
earlier.
Always wrong to, I wouldn't say it's always wrong to kill.
To kill an innocent.
It's always wrong to kill an innocent.
But if they acknowledge the humanity, then they have to be okay with killing the innocent.
Yeah.
And no one wants to do that.
No.
But that's what it is.
Yeah, and if you accept that, then it also leads to dark roads, right? If you do say, actually, you know what, it is sometimes okay to kill innocent people, then you look at what's going on in Canada.
With euthanasia as well. What's your take on euthanasia?
Opposed to it.
What's your opinion on how it's now rising? Because I think a decade ago or even 2 decades ago, it wasn't certainly not as legal as it is now. And this kind of right to die. They use euphemisms like they do with abortion.
They call it MAID, medical assistance in dying, right? In fact, some funeral homes now in Canada, I literally saw yesterday, they now have dying rooms. So they have a room like this with, nicely decorated and whatnot.
These are like old persons, like
funeral homes, right? So that you can,
go to the funeral home.
Yeah, if they want to make it super efficient, maybe you should just, lie in your coffin already, and, they just end you there. And I was like, this is so dark. But this is also the inevitable conclusion of a godless society. If you completely eliminate all Christian foundations and principles, including the sanctity of life, and everything just becomes this super logical, rational, just liberty above everything, you should be, because the ultimate, if the argument is my body, my choice, you should literally be able to do whatever you want with your own body, provided it doesn't directly hurt another person. Then why can't you, do whatever surgery you want? Or, ultimately, the ultimate one is you can choose when you die, right? And other people support that, right? That's why even when you say someone committed suicide, people will try to correct you and say, no, died by suicide. I'm like, really? We're at the point where I need to be politically correct about suicide, right? I can't say someone committed suicide because that's me making a moral value judgment about that being wrong, and it should just be died by. I don't like all this sanitation of language and the political correctness and all that stuff. I don't play any of that.
Have you heard what they're doing in Canada too? That now if you're a teenager, if you're a kid, and you have mental health
Yeah.
distress.
Or there's people who it's been suggested.
It's okay. I mean, it can be okay under certain cases.
Yeah, depression.
To kill a kid because they have depression.
Mm-hmm. Depression, mental health issues, poverty, people suffering with PTSD. It's been recommended for some military veterans. There was someone...
That's so disgusting.
It's disgusting. There have been people who are afraid of, they're in poverty, they're afraid of becoming homeless, and they literally suggest to them, it's suggested as an option, have you thought about dying? Right? We could just kill you, right? I mean, again, in a hard rationalist, purely logical, so it's like, okay, well, I mean, it's a quote unquote solution, I guess, right? Oh, someone is suffering. Oh,
it's the final solution, right?
We could put you down, right?
Nazi
just like
Germany's final solution is let's kill the undesirables.
And this is also what happens when you don't believe that human beings have anything that is uniquely special about them that puts us above any other type of animal. You can put down a dog, you can put down a horse, you can put down a cat, whatever. Oh, they're suffering. Oh, they've got some, serious ailment that they're not going to recover from. They're just not wanted. It's inconvenient. Okay, you can put the dog down. And now it's like, okay, well, if we're just animals, that's it. We're just apes, slightly higher order, slightly more intelligent. Then yeah, why can't you? This stuff doesn't surprise me, is what I'm saying. It doesn't surprise me because it is the rational endpoint of these other arguments. It's like, okay, if this is your moral foundation or lack of, if everything is just about liberty and quote unquote consent.
Well, it's about power, right? Because if you have the power to be strong and healthy and take care of yourself, then you're not at risk. But if you're a poor person, like you were saying, or an elderly person or a sick teenager, you have less power. And so the powerful ones are like, why are you around? Why are the less fit around? Or the babies in the womb has zero power.
Yeah, zero power. So that's one way to look at it. But I think the way that people who promote this stuff, I know this because I've had these conversations with people, the way they view it is just this very cold, soulless, completely secular viewpoint of, because in a totally secular, degenerated society, really the only sins are lack of consent and sometimes, offending the wrong person, right? So that everything just comes to consent. You see this in conversations about sex and relationships and marriage and children, all these things, right? The only thing they care about is consent.
But it's not even logically consistent because they don't really care about consent. Because when it comes to like abortion, there's zero consent from the child to be killed.
They don't consider the child a child.
Right. Well,
this is what I'm saying, right? So it's gone so far that it's such an incredibly limited and selfish worldview, which, and I can get where some of it stems from, right? Because what's the best way to put this? If you don't have certain foundations and boundaries, and you're willing to even ignore your gut feelings, because there can be wisdom in I've heard of this concept. What's it called? It's almost like I think it might be called the wisdom of disgust, something like that. I don't know who coined the term, but it's the fact that even if you cannot sometimes fully articulate why something is wrong, but you know it is. You know on just like a deep gut level, wait, there's something wrong with that. You might not be able to come up with the perfect argument or intellectual explanation, but you're like, that's wrong, right? If someone hears about, euthanizing someone because they're euthanizing a depressed 19-year-old, right? In your gut, unless you've been so knocked out of your intuition and so far removed from anything godly, even someone who doesn't even believe in God knows, wait, like there's something wrong with that. There's something wrong with that. But then when you just get into this like hoity-toity, academic, super intellectual, absolutely secular worldview, you can kind of justify almost anything, right? Again, as long as it's not directly taking from someone else or, taking someone's life or whatever against their consent. But if it's just like, oh, well, they consented, right? I don't know if you remember years ago, there was that whole case that happened, I think it was in Germany, where there was that guy who put out the ad that he wanted to eat somebody. Do you remember this?
I don't remember this. Tell me what happened.
I think it was in Germany. Okay, so there was a man, obviously very sick and twisted, but he put out an ad that he wanted to find a young man to have
like Nathan Dahmer.
Have sexual relations with and then eat. Okay? And someone actually responded to this ad, and the two met up, again, quote unquote, fully consensual, and they had relations, and after that, the guy killed him and ate him and put some of him in the fridge and whatever. And I want to say this was maybe about 10 to 15 years ago. And it became this huge national and international case, an actual interesting case study in consent and morality and whatever, right? Was this a murder? Right? Because he consented. Obviously, the guy's not right in the head. Obviously, nobody here is right in the head for this whole thing to even happen.
Yeah, but the MAID people, the euthanasia people, why is that any different than what they do?
This is what I'm saying, right? So this is what I'm saying. So this happened, I think, over a decade ago. But from this position, it's like, there would be people, there will be millions of people who are like, well, no, that's not murder because it was consensual, right? And then you get into all these other questions about morality and ethics. Is like, is just consent, is that going to be this standard going forward? Because that's like where somewhere like Canada is going. It's just like, look, as long as there is consent, then you can, as long as the person consents to being killed, then there's nothing kind of wrong with that. And I just think it's stuff like that is very concerning to me.
So once you became pro-life and you're like, this is crazy. I mean, I'm sure as you investigated it, you're like, I can't believe this is happening. That's how I felt when I first found out about abortion. What do you think is our responsibility? Once people wake up to the fact that, in the United States alone, 2,500 children killed every single day. Globally, they estimate up to 50, 60, 70,000 children killed daily.
Yeah.
It's insane. What is our responsibility in the face of that?
I think the first is exactly what we're doing, which is to speak about it and to be courageous. One of the biggest problems we're having across the entire Western world right now is, I call it the pandemic of cowardice, right? People just operating from a position of fear. And I do understand it, right? Not just on this issue, on so many things, people are afraid to express their opinion, afraid to say what they know to be true, afraid to put their head above the parapet in any type of way where they could be called a name or they could deal with some criticism or some type of social disapproval, anything like that. I understand why that's the case. But without that first step, without a little bit of courage, without the conversation, nothing can change. Because even when it comes to this issue in particular, and I've been there, most people don't really think about it. A lot of people are, quote unquote, call it pro-choice or support abortion, whatever, kind of by default, because society and the legal system decided many decades ago, before we were even born, that this is the rule of the land, and laws are both influenced by and influence morality, right? So if the law of the land is saying, okay, this is acceptable and this is moral and this is fine, then someone who's born into that society and culture is going to just absorb that as a default position and just be like, oh, okay, well, in the absence of me doing any research and thinking about this, I'm just going to absorb what society, culture, lawmakers, whatever, are telling me as my default position. And so I think in the long term, that needs to change. I know in the USA in particular, a lot of the battle and the fight is with the laws, and the laws are certainly important. But the truth is, you need a large-scale change of heart, and that's hard. That is a real battle, and I think sometimes people don't even want to do it because they think it's such an uphill battle that it can't really be done. Well,
that's one of the great things about what you do and how you do it is you're doing it in a winsome way.
Yeah.
I think that's why a lot of people are drawn to you, because you're speaking truths in a crazy world, but you're doing it in a winsome way. So what is it? How do we do that? How do we change hearts? How do we make that societal change?
I think we speak up. We show people the truth. I think individual conversations are very important. I'm sure you've done it much more than me, but I know for a fact that I have pushed many people I personally know more towards an absolute pro-life direction, or at least I've nudged them more in that way by forcing them to think about the issue in a way they've never really thought about it. Because again, so many people are not even exposed to these ideas, right? Especially, I'd imagine here somewhere like California, right? You're going to just have a lot of young people, especially, they're just in this climate. They've never even heard the pro-life side. They don't even know what an abortion is. They don't know what happens. They just don't know, right? No one's told them. No one's had the hard conversation with them, whatever it is. So they're going to believe and behave how they do in all these aspects. So, I think we have to accept that it's a long-term thing. It's a generational thing. It's not just a U.S. issue or even a Western issue. It's a global issue.
Are other countries more pro-life?
There are some countries are. Yeah, Africa as a continent in general is much more pro-life. The Caribbean in general is much more pro-life. The Middle East in general is much more pro-life. China, absolutely not. So there's different places. It just depends. It really depends on the country and the culture and the religion or lack thereof and so on. So one thing that certainly gives me a lot of optimism is if you look looking back through human history, over the course of time, at every point in human history, there's always been groups of people who are not considered worthy of life or worthy of full rights. And the general trajectory of our nations and the world as a whole has been expanding that, right? Caring about the rights of more and more people, right? As dark as it is, there was a time in this country, not even that long ago, where Black people were literally not even considered human beings. And therefore, you can justify slavery, you can justify barbarism, you can justify murder, you can justify, if you say this is not a human, right? The only time people try to make a distinction between a human and a person is when they're trying to justify some type of either enslavement or harm. Those are the only times people have it. Well, it's a human, but not a person. Right? As soon as people start trying to make that distinction, they're trying to justify something wicked. So just given that course of human history, even now, people care more about like animal rights than they ever did. People are caring about all these other things. So I think as time goes on, and as technology, I think medical technology is going to make some changes here. I mean, I don't like the idea of an artificial womb. Something about it grosses me out. But even that something like that would really bring the conversation to a head, right? If it's like, okay, if people's concern is about the pregnancy part and the women's rights and autonomy part, which that's the primary channel a lot of these arguments come through. If it's like, okay, what if there is an alternative that a pregnancy can be ended without killing the child, surely that's a win-win, right? Surely someone who's pro-life and someone who's pro-choice, like that sounds to me like, okay, that's an actual solution. And that's something that is potentially on the horizon. Like on my gut level, I'm like, don't really like it, right? But something like that, I think, would even just bring the conversation to such a head.
But I think they would still push back and say, well, I don't want my biological matter out there in the world. Well, it's like a property mentality. Like the child's my property, I can kill it if I want.
Yeah, because some people, would say they'd rather abort the child than put them up for adoption, right?
We hear that all the time.
I hear it all the time. And so, yeah, but what it would do is it would force a big conversation on a massive scale, right? Because then it's like, okay, what are we really even discussing here, right? So at the moment, the thing with this issue, even as someone who is pro-life, I don't like talking about it. It's really not a nice, it's my least favorite topic to discuss. Like I'm happy to talk all these other things we can talk about this, talk about that.
And is that because it's so heavy?
It's so heavy.
It's so heavy,
regardless of someone's position on it, it's heavy. You're talking about human life. You're talking about life and death of the most innocent baby. Like it's gross. People get offended by it because being a man, right? Oh, you don't have a uterus. You're a man. There's people who wouldn't even.
Well, you're a woman, right? So that's.
There's people who
already taken care of.
Who literally are seething that I'm even have the audacity to talk about this thing because I'm the other half of the
I look at that and it's like feminism. The early OG feminists secured equal protection under the law, basically for men and women. Right to vote, right to work, and then we took that power. And we're like, well, now we're just going to kill our children.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so, like that thing of like, how dare you as a man talk about this? You're talking about this because, first of all, half of the children killed are boys. And then you're talking about this because every child has a father.
Yes.
So there's a huge responsibility for men.
I'm half the equation.
You're half the equation.
And the other part of the equation that people, again, don't even want to talk about it is, from the male perspective, even just thinking from a totally secular, rational perspective, it's like, well, men are on the hook. Right? If a woman, if you're saying, okay, it's completely on the woman, whatever, and there are men out there who wanted to have a child and then the woman goes and aborts it. There's also men who didn't want to have a child and the woman keeps the child and now they're on the hook for 18 years of child support or whatever. And from either perspective, you're like, this is not, we're not having a fully open and honest conversation here. You can't just say, okay, yeah, men should be on the hook for that, but also they should have absolutely no say and are not even relevant to the conversation. It's like, well, that's not being honest. It's like, well, yes, they are. Like, you absolutely are, right? If someone then wanted to make an argument, men should be able to sign those rights away and whatever. Like, I mean, it's a conversation that, to me, that's an even darker. Like, now you're going to an even darker place. It's more quote unquote fair. It's more balanced in terms of the dynamics, but it's like, gosh, do we really just want to get to a society where this is really where we're heading? Just no one has any type of personal responsibility.
But that's back to the artificial womb thing. The scary thing with that is it breaks that natural bond. The child deserves a mother.
I agree.
The child deserves the biological mother. And yes, some biological mothers, because of addiction or because of abuse, they're like in this position where they can't mother. But ultimately, like, to remove that child from his or her mother's womb just because the mother says, I don't want it, you have a responsibility, a natural responsibility. I
agree. It's why I'm not a fan of surrogacy either.
Yep.
But again, if the only thing is consent, of course, something like that is going to be okay and going to become normalized. So, but this is why it's such a hard conversation, and people understandably are very passionate about it on all sides of the argument, right? There are people who are, being pro-abortion is almost like their religion, right? There's people who I've spoken to or heard from, and this is the one issue where, like, this is the one thing they consider themselves pro-choice, and this is the one thing they are so adamant, like, they will absolutely not, no matter what, change their view on.
Why do you think that is? What do you think is motivating that at the deep core level?
Absolute solipsism. Absolute solipsism and selfishness. Because, look, the truth is, something like abortion is not, I can't say something like abortion. Abortion itself. It is the ultimate out, right? This is also why so many men support it. I believe there's more men who support abortion than there are women.
That was definitely true originally.
Okay.
When it was first legalized, it was men that were men were the biggest campaigners of legalizing abortion.
Okay. I believe it's not still true statistically. I think so.
That more men support it?
I'm not sure. Maybe it depends on the country.
Yeah. Definitely a lot of women are.
But it shouldn't, in both directions, it shouldn't surprise people, right? Because if you're a guy who wants to be reckless and gets the wrong women pregnant or whatever, right? Like, you've got this out. You've got this out of, like, okay, I've done this thing, but we can just completely sweep this under the rug, literally eliminate the evidence, and no one needs to be any wiser. So, and from the female perspective, it's also it's the ultimate out. Right, and we live in a society where we shun personal responsibility at increasing and alarming rates. Right, telling someone that, hey, look, you need to take responsibility for your decisions. You need to have accountability, whatever. And this is also incredible in this conversation because we know how babies are made. If you do not want to have an accidental pregnancy, there are many options. There's many options out there, right? If babies just sort of came out from the sky and women just randomly got pregnant when a man looked at them the wrong way or whatever, then the conversation, you see what I mean? But people are not having the whole honest conversation, right? There's upstream.
Right.
There's upstream here. There's behavioral upstream. If you do not want to father a child or, a woman, there's so many options.
But that's so it's so mind-boggling to people today, the modern person, to think that I have a responsibility when I have sex to any children that I may conceive, because we've severed sex from procreation.
And that's
it's the contraceptive mentality.
Yes, and this is why you get goofy statements like, consent to sex is not consent to pregnancy. You're like, what are you even talking? Like, this is how disassociated people have become from both our natural bodies and, I would say, any type of spiritual connection to God, right? Where the act of sex is not even considered through a reproductive lens, right? Like, that's almost that's seen as this absolutely horrible negative consequence. I think another big factor as well, culturally, there's so many things to talk about, is that I do think that the idea that having a child will utterly destroy your life has seeped young people's minds, especially, in such a deep way. And I think that has been pushed for so many decades and from so many angles that the average young man, the average young woman is like terrified of that concept. Like terrified. Women are terrified about, the way their body is going to change and how their life is going to change, impacts on their career, this and this and this. Like we've been sold all these ideas. Men have also been, having a child that's gonna ruin your life, ruin your finances, like destroy this, destroy that. And that's just been absorbed by so many people. It's been propagated in movies, it's been propagated in TV series and magazines, through politics, through people's own families, all these type of things. So I do genuinely, this is one thing, like I'm pro-life. I do absolutely understand both sides of the arguments, and I've had so many conversations with people, and I see how people think and where they get these ideas from and whatever. And this is all stuff, you ask the solution, and it's like, this is all stuff that needs to be fixed and improved ultimately. We do need to change people's attitudes towards everything for, human life, sex itself, relationships, marriage. There's economic and financial things that are going on here as well, right? If people feel like, I can't even afford to have a child or get married or have a family or any of these things, then it all increases the likelihood of this type of behavior. And then at the same time, you're telling people that, massively promoting hookup culture, telling both men and women, hey, just go out there and have sex with all the people you want. Again, as long as it's consensual, how dare you judge someone from, that person's had sex with there's nothing wrong with having sex with 500 different people, right? That's totally fine as long as it was consensual. How dare you even consider that might not be a good thing? And that's where we are. And it's goofy. It's not moral. Obviously, it's not in line with God.
And what's so sad, it doesn't make people happy.
And it doesn't make people happy,
People
right?
want to be happy, and they claim this like libertinism is going to make them happy. And people are more miserable than ever historically. Like the depression rates, the suicide rates, the anxiety rates.
Yeah, I think something like a quarter of American women are on an antidepressant, something like that.
Well, being on birth control is definitely going to help you become more depressed.
That too.
Hormonal contraceptives.
There's so many moving pieces here.
So what's your message to men?
Message to men? To
be, when it comes to the chaos and the fact that we have this crisis where children are literally being butchered. I mean, I see this as the greatest human rights issue of our day.
I agree with you. Firstly, everything I'm saying, this applies equally to men and to women. I think sometimes I say stuff and people are like, they think I'm just, I'm being misogynistic because I'm just, talking. I'm like, no, I'm talking to men as well, right? Again, we all know where babies come from. We have control over our own. But you want to talk bodily autonomy? We've got control over our bodies, right? I've never just, been walking down the street. Oh, whoops! Ooh, she's pregnant, right? Like, that's not how it goes, right? So let's be honest. Let's be mature. Let's be controlled. Let's have self-control. If the thought of having a child with someone, if you're a woman and the thought of having a child with this guy mortifies you and freaks you out, if you're a man and the thought of even having a child with someone freaks, why are you jumping to bed together and having sex, right? Like, why? Like, we know how these things happen. Let's stop being dumb. Let's stop trying to kid ourselves, and let's take that responsibility, right? So my message to guys is, the most PC way, control your penis, man, right? Like, we know
simple truth.
And
women, don't accept the man. Like,
if I tell women to close their legs, that's how somehow considered sexist. If I tell men to control their willies, let's use the British term, then that's considered okay. But like, both are just true. We're not just base animals. Yes, we can have animalistic desires and so on. Like, that's nothing new. It helps to propagate our species. But there are boundaries and morals, and even from you don't even need to be religious, right? Even from a totally secular viewpoint, whatever. Like, there are very good reasons to not just be running around out there, what they call sowing your wild oats and just being a. But that would be my ultimate message on that. on that particular issue.
We're going to do part 2 in a little bit. We're going to take a lunch break. So that's on the other podcast for people listening. The Lila Rose podcast, this is exclusives. But where can people, for those listening to this one, where can people find your work?
Yeah, sure. So to find more...
Follow him, make up for the 4,000 people who were mad because of the pro-life tweet.
Yeah, I've made that back up. But you can follow me on all social media at Zuby Music, Zuby Music. You can check out my podcast, Real Talk with Zuby, on all platforms and all my music as well. Just search Zuby, Zuby, and I'm easy to find.
Awesome. Thanks, Zuby.
Appreciate it.